Today we're going to be coating some cyanotype paper for cyanotype. I have here my cyanotype chemistry. This is from Photographers Formulary. This is cyanotype solution A and cyanotype solution B. So what I've got here today is I have my little mixing container. I have a sponge brush, some gloves, and some paper that I'm going to coat for this process. So to start out with, I'm going to go ahead and tear off the paper I'm going to use. Now, the cyanotype chemistry is not poisonous, but is a skin irritant. So it's actually a good idea to wear gloves if you have them. But if you don't, just make sure that if you do get anything on your hands, you just wash your hands thoroughly after you're finished. Now, the mixture here is a 50-50 mixture. So I tend to like to use the capful. If you have like a little measuring glass, you can do that as well. So just fill up the little capful here. I'm going to do two capfuls. Now, you can buy this chemistry either in the liquid form, which is actually safer because the powdered form is airborne and can be breathed in. And I've also found that it's good for years. You get it and then you have enough. It continues to make good cyanotypes long after you initially get it. So there we go. A little bit of A, a little bit of B. It's kind of this putrid green color. That's what you want. And I've set up here a glass slab that I'll be working on today. I find that it's really, you want a surface that you can wipe down. You can either lay down some paper or what have you. The challenge here is that because this stuff is so light colored initially, you're not going to see that you've made a mess until later. This chemistry becomes light sensitive as it dries. So I have found that I used to do this in a dark room, but I found that I couldn't see what I was doing well enough to get an even coverage. And so what I've ended up doing here is I'm just in my house. I don't have a lot of bright lights on, but there's some natural light coming in through the windows. But I find that what I can do is I can coat it here in this room, and then after it's coated, I'll let it dry in a dark space. Right, so it's once it dries is when it really becomes light sensitive, and so for me it's much better to get a even coat now, and I can see what I'm doing. So I'm just dipping the sponge brush here in this little cup. So here we go. Now I like to hold the sponge brush at a 45, kind of at this angle. I'm actually holding a little bit steeper than that, but I think that the sponge of the brush is hitting the paper at about 45 degrees. Now, some paper is more absorbent than other paper. This paper is taking the cyanotype chemistry really, really evenly, so I would recommend it. But I've gotten successful cyanotypes on all kinds of weird papers. I've done it on Bristols. I've done it on Japanese papers, really thin Japanese paper, and you can also do it on fabrics. You want to make sure that you just get it kind of even. Although if you're interested in some streaky exposure effects, you can actually go in with a paintbrush and cover your cyanotype with, kind of brush mark application, and that will show in the image. So you can see that it laid down kind of a light acid yellow color. As it dries, it's going to become more of a putrescent green color, and that's good. That'll show you that it's dry. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck this away and let it dry in a dark space. I have some paper that's coated and ready to go, and I have some objects here that I'm going to use to cast shadows on that paper. Mind you, this is enough to protect it from the light. It's a fairly slow exposure, but once I take it out, it's going to expose pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that you sit with it while the light is exposing so that things don't blow away. You would be surprised. So here we go. Here. Grab one of my.
You're being.
So this is what it looks like. And I'm just going to set it here on the table. And working fairly quickly, I'm going to lay my plant matter. I'm doing a sort of botanical exposure here. I'm just going to lay that on top. That looks good. And I'm just going to let that sit now for about 15 minutes. Now it's a little bit, it's pretty overcast today, so I'm going to extend that to about 20 minutes. If it was a sunny day, 15 minutes is usually pretty good. If it's an underexposure, it'll still work, but it will be a lighter color. A full exposure should give you a bright blue. Now, if you have an underexposure and it's not giving you enough interest, you can actually coat the paper again and give yourself a second double exposure. So we're gonna let this sit for 15 minutes. Try not to let it move. Sometimes if it like blows around a little bit, you can't really position it back exactly where it is. And so at that point, sometimes it's better to just call it and rinse it out, even if it isn't a full exposure, because you still want that crisp line instead of the double line. Sometimes people will press down their objects with glass. For me, I prefer this kind of close contact where it's touching closely. It will have a crisp edge, where the object's lifting off the paper and have a softer edge. So for me, I find that to be really interesting. And so this, you really don't want anything farther off the paper than these high elements. Also make sure you're not casting your own shadow, right? So we'll let this sit and we'll see how this develops. I've just pulled the leaves off and in it goes into the bath. So come over here and take a peek. So you can see everywhere that it was touching, we have bright white, and then where the light is hitting is going to develop into a deep blue. So it takes about like 5 to 10 minutes to fully develop and rinse out. It tends to darken a little bit as it dries, but there it is. That's the cyanotype.
It's looking like a school of fish.
Yeah.
I like it.
All right, cut.